All right, welcome to the last day of notes for Origin of Life, everybody. You made it this far. Give yourselves a round of applause. After this, you'll be about a quarter of the way through all the notes in this class. Yes? Sure. So, last time we kind of ended with, this idea of RNA and protein and how they just can't come together and be a functional cell, even under the very best conditions in the best life-giving warm pond you can imagine. And we really dove deep into that. So right now I just kind of want to back out for a moment and just sort of, look at this a little bit more in a broader sense. So when we look at life and the possibility of it coming from non-life, real science just says it can't happen. You can't get life coming from non-life. You can't get the building blocks of life coming from nothing. You can't get the building blocks of the building blocks to come from nothing. And even if you could get those, that's a far cry from getting them to organize themselves into a living cell and have it programmed to do everything that it needs to do to live and thrive and reproduce. I gave a couple examples of this, like the ones with the hardware and the software on my phone and everything, and talked a little bit about a mousetrap. I got one more for you, because this is a really important point. So this is a Wimshurst machine, and it makes sparks. It's like a mini lightning machine. Well, that's what we're going to find out at the end of class today. But it gives off some pretty good sparks there, and the closer they are, the quicker those sparks happen. The further apart they are, it takes a bit longer, but those sparks are a lot louder and a lot bigger. So it's a functional machine. Now let's pretend that I took this Wimshurst machine. Everything that's necessary for it to be a working machine is right here. Let's imagine I just undid all of these bolts and I took all of it apart so it was all in its, separate pieces, and I put all those pieces in a box. It doesn't matter how long you give that box, doesn't matter how many times you shake it up and down, whether or not you put it on a roller coaster or you put it up in space for 1 billion years, you will never have these materials coming together in order to make this Wimshurst machine. Because that's not how things work in the real world, like second law thermodynamics, right? You don't automatically get order from disorder. You need a designer or somebody to come in and do work on that object to make it orderly. You're certainly not going to get something like this coming together on its own, even if you had all of the constituent parts. So you and me in the simplest cell are way more than just, the sum of all the little molecules that make us up. The really important thing about us is not so much about what makes us up, like this Wimshurst machine, but how we're all put together and how we're all programmed to be able to live and breathe and do everything that we need to do to survive. Any one of which these molecular programs, if they stop functioning, we would stop functioning and drop over dead right here, right now. Just like if I took one thing off of this Wimshurst machine, maybe I removed this ball, now all of a sudden it's not going to make lightning anymore. It just doesn't do what it needs to do in order for that to happen. The same thing would be true for you and me if one of our cells just stopped doing one of the things it's programmed to do. And we left off with this quote last time. So, University of California, Berkeley, Professor Hubert Yaki puts it like this. Research on the origin of life seems to be unique in that the conclusion has already been authoritatively accepted. What remains to be done is to find the scenarios which describe the detailed mechanisms and processes by which this has happened. One must conclude that, contrary to the established and current wisdom, a scenario describing the genesis of life on Earth by chance and natural causes, which can be accepted on the basis of fact and not faith, has not yet been written. So in other words, what he's saying is up here, we already are assuming that life came from non-life, because after all, if you're a naturalistic scientist who believes in Big Bang and the evolution, that there was no God, no creator, life must have come from non-life at some point somehow. But he's conceding down here that we're really nowhere close to understanding how this could have happened. Why? Because all the real science points the other direction. But it's easy for us to think maybe life can come from non-life, right? Because in the summertime, the previous summer, you could have, made sure that all the sidewalk tiles near your house and all the, cracks in your driveway have all been cleared of weeds. You might have sprayed Roundup in them to make sure nothing's growing there so that it looks nice and neat. But the following summer, you're going to find weeds growing up there no matter how much poison you dumped in those cracks the previous year. Because life just seems to take hold everywhere. And so it's sort of easy for us to fall into the trap of thinking that it's easy for it to just spring forth. But it's not. Anytime we see life, it has its origination with another form of life. In this case, seeds that we can't see just find their way in the cracks, and then the sun shines on them and photosynthesis does its thing, and all of this vegetation grows up. But we have to remember that life only comes from life, even if you can't see those seeds in the air being planted in the ground. But if you can prove, or at least give a plausible way of showing that life can come from non-life, you're going to be rich. You're going to be exactly $1 million richer. The Origin of Life Prize will be awarded for proposing a highly plausible mechanism for the spontaneous rise of genetic instructions in nature sufficient to give rise to life. To win, the explanation must be consistent with empirical, in other words, experimental, biochemical, kinetic, and thermodynamic concepts as further delineated herein, very official sounding, and must be published in a well-respected peer-reviewed science journal. Any guesses on how often this prize has been claimed?
1,000,000 times.
0 times. And so I don't think it ever will be claimed because, again, you would claim it. Well, make sure you publish that research in a good scientific journal, and it could be yours. So yeah, if you can show that life can demonstrably come from non-life, your life's pretty much all set to go. But everything we see in real science done in the real world, in the present, points the opposite way. That's why nobody's collected on this prize. Professor David Galertner, Yale University, says to create just one new protein by chance, the odds are so astronomically small that there are fewer atoms in the entire universe by comparison. The odds bury you. It can't be done. And we kind of took a little tour of how unlikely that was in the first day when we were talking about the odds of this actually occurring. From this slide, please write down everything in this second box. So we've been giving naturalism benefit of the doubt after benefit of the doubt after benefit of the doubt. You know, when we looked at cosmology, the history of the universe, we found that when we just examine things out there, they don't look billions of years old. They look much younger. And if you don't have those billions of years to work with, there's no way life's going to come from non-life. So we said, let's just give them those billions of years. And so we did. We said, okay, let's pretend that you can get this protein material in a primordial soup. Let's pretend you can get the building blocks of RNA in the primordial soup. But again, it's not going to matter because water naturally drives those things apart. It works to mess them up. Even if you get the right things in the right places, they're not going to link up. And even if they would, they're not going to program themselves with the software they need to live and replicate. So this is taking this one step further. Now we're going to say, okay, let's say you have this magically developed, created protocell, something a little bit simpler than the simple cell that we learn about in biology class. So if you have this protocell, which can't do quite as many things as the simple cell, is it possible that you could get higher level, more complex cells evolving from that? And the answer is no, it's impossible. And the reason it's impossible is because we kind of forget all the things involved in keeping a cell alive. We haven't even talked about the fact that if you have a cell that can't adequately repair the DNA damage done to it as it replicates, it's just going to fall apart and die before your very eyes. So you can't just have a proto-cell that can't repair DNA damage, because that's as good as just not even having a cell at all. It won't last. If it can't fine-tune the ability of the remaining genes, then another dead end. It's not going to live long enough to replicate or give rise to anything that could cause any genuine evolution. If it can't digest complex compounds, again, you're back to square one. And furthermore, all of these little things, even this supposed proto-cell, it can only exist, and all the components of it can only exist inside of a cell, inside of an ideal organic rich environment. So as soon as you have something that's not this, life-sustaining warm primordial soup, which there's really no evidence that it could have been there anyway, you're back to square one, even with a living proto-cell. So it all just kind of comes to nothing. And once again, we see another arrow pointed exactly away from the idea of naturalism, the idea that you can get life without a creator. And so this is kind of like, where does this leave us? Because in the scientific world, they close their eyes to a lot of the data. That's why so many believe in the Big Bang and its time scale, even though when we examine the physical things in space, they don't look that old. And the same thing is true here. But many scientists are starting to realize that this is a huge, huge issue. And they've realized it for a long time. From this slide, write down the third bullet point and the title. So all the way back in 1962, people realized how complicated these systems would have to be in order for life to exist, even on the simplest scale. And ever since the 1960s, a growing number of people have realized that life can't come from non-life. And Sir Francis Crick was one of those. And by the way, the further we go in the future here, from 1962 to today, with every passing year, with all the extra research that we've done with even better microscopes and better technology and more sophistication, we find that as we go deeper and deeper and deeper in the living cell and all the constituent parts that makes it up, they get more and more complicated, more and more technologically sophisticated, to the point where it's just crazy to think that this sophistication could have just arisen naturalistically. So the odds of life coming from non-life have been getting worse and worse and worse, even since 1962. And Francis Crick puts it this way: an honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going. So it's like, where do they go from here? Because, if life can't arise from non-life, there must have been a creator. But at the same time, they believe in this philosophy, and the foundation of their belief system is that there is no God, that there is no creator. And when that's your foundation, what's the next step? Where do you go if the evidence all shows that life can't come from non-life? And the answer to that question is this, and I'd like you to write this down, please. Yeah, there'll be some more stuff to write down after this. Anybody know what panspermia is? So Dr. Francis Crick, along with other scientists, realized that life can't come from non-life. It's just way too sophisticated, way too complicated. So what they believe is in panspermia, which is the idea that aliens from outer space came to Earth and visited this primordial soup and seeded life on it. And then from there, those cells developed and evolved into what we see today. You can write this down too, please. And it's kind of easy for us to sort of snicker and giggle at this, but again, this is what you have to believe if your foundation is that the God of the Bible isn't real. You have to believe in crazy stuff like this. And I put a little animation in here too, so you can see. So there comes the aliens, they drop off life, and then they're gone. There's a good use of a half hour to get those linking up so it looked like the octopus came out of the spacecraft. But this actually doesn't fix the problem. Anybody tell me why this doesn't fix the problem of life coming from non-life?
Where the aliens come.
Exactly. Where did the aliens come from? And who created those aliens? Well, aliens. Oh, who created those aliens? Well, then who created the aliens who created the aliens? Other aliens. Well, you can't just keep pushing this problem back in time because this Big Bang supposedly happened in the finite past. You can't keep going back forever. At some point, life still would have had to come from non-life, which is the exact philosophy that they're trying to get away from when they advocate this idea. So get this written down too then. If you want to try and draw an octopus, feel free. The origin of life from non-living chemicals has been an article of blind faith. And I'd actually take this one step further. Blind faith is faith in something despite the fact that there's no evidence for it. Believing life came from non-life is not just blind faith, it's irrational faith. It's a faith in something even though all the evidence is pointing in the exact opposite direction. Not science, and this has been true since the time of Darwin. The main problem with much chemical evolutionary theorizing is that the theorists consider life as an assembly of chemicals rather than an information processing machine. And they never answer the question, how did molecular hardware write its own software? That's it for origin of life. So again, make sure to have this summary written down in a special place away from your notes. The semester final is going to be on just the summaries that you write down. In addition, there's a special day I have set aside at the end of the semester where you can do some artsy things and make a nice little cover for all your summaries here. after you're done with this class, these are what I want you to take away from it. Yep, you're writing all of this down. And believe me, I agonized trying to get this more and more succinct. So this is the best I can do. I can't really leave anything else out of here that wouldn't be too important. So when you get to the bottom, again, there's a lot of sciencey words here. Remember hydrolysis? That's the idea and the fact that water serves to break up these molecules if they even start linking up together. Chirality, that's the whole thing where you need the same, like left-hand and right-handed molecules. You need those all to be left-handed molecules in order for an amino acid to grow to the point where life might come about. Instability, again, all of these things inside a cell that are supposedly floating around in this primordial soup, those are all unstable outside of the cell itself, so they're not going to last. And reproduction, that's something that RNA can definitely do, but protein is horrible at it. And catalyzation is something that protein can do, but RNA is bad at it. And you need both of those in your primordial soup, in your proto-cell to make it work. So, there you go. Yes?
What does primordial mean?
Primordial just means like, I think it means like before real history. I could be wrong on that. Is that what it means? Okay. Yes, this is the last thing for origin of life. After this, we're going to run an experiment involving electricity here. We'll see how brave some of you are.